Hello, my name is Russell Myers. Welcome to Issues Unite. All right, so capitalists have this tendency to want to define inflation in terms of the money supply. Now, the original definition of inflation from many decades ago, actually, the term inflation actually did mean an increase in the money supply. You were inflating the supply of money. However, that definition comes from a time when we were on the gold standard. The value of the currency was determined in relation to the gold reserves and, reserves of assets, hard assets, gold, oil, etc. But the gold standard went out many decades ago. And ever since then, we've been on a fiat currency system. And some people want to put forward MMT, modern monetary theory, and act as though this is not a system that we have already been on for many decades. Well, ever since the MMT was the fiat currency system was put in place to replace the gold standard, we've been seeing an increase in the money supply. At first it wasn't so drastic, but ever since Reagan, it has been increasing and increasing over and over, just nonstop. Now, so what we see, and a better definition today of inflation is the purchasing power of the currency in relation to, earnings. And what we have seen is that the purchasing power has gone down as the money supply has increased. Now, an interesting correlation that you'll find if you look back through history is that the higher inflation goes, the lower the purchasing power of the dollar becomes, the higher the crime rate goes up. Back in I'm old enough to have lived through these things. Back in the 1970s, we had the gas crisis, and which caused rampant inflation. We had urban decay, and the crime rate went through the roof. Then we went through Reagan, who decreased taxes for the rich, but increased taxes on the middle class 11 times while he was in office. And prices kept on rising, and the crime rate continued to go up. Of course, he ramped up the war on drugs. First you had Nixon with the war on drugs. Then you had Reagan, who ramped up on it. Then you had Bill Clinton with the 1994 crime bill and 3 strikes. So now the crime rate kind of went down in the 1990s, but that was at the same time that the economy improved, although that was all the bubble, the internet bubble, that wound up crashing. Yeah. Every time that you see inflation rising, as we see right now, inflation and crime rise in tandem with one another. So the problem is that, yes, we live in the wealthiest country on earth. It's not, we can't deny that. Monetarily, we live in the wealthiest country on earth. But all the wealth is up at the top 1%. And most of that, with the zero, it lies with the top 0.1%. So we have seen stagnant wages. Even now, as we see prices rising, you can say that wages are rising as a result of people refusing to take jobs and be exploited, but millions are quitting their jobs. They're refusing to take these jobs at low wages. And we hear all these reports about crime rising. Of course, that's just coincidental, coincidental that crime is rising at the immediately starting after the defund the police movement. Now, I'm very much in favor of the defund the police movement. The biggest, opposition that I've heard about that is about the name. I do find the name to be unfortunate. In several cases, I find the Black Lives Matter and the defund the police movement, I find the names to be unfortunate. I think they could have been labeled better. But that doesn't stop the validity of those movements. The more that we strip out social programs, the more that wages stagnate. If you've got the combination of stagnant wages and the stripping out of social programs, then you have a resulting inflation that is well above and beyond the alleged inflation rate, because you're not looking at this. This is stagflation. Stagnant wages with increasing prices. But in addition to the stagnant wages, you've got reduced benefits or assistance to the people with the low wages at the same time. So you've got rising prices, stagnant wages, and decreased resources for the people at the bottom of the income chain. This does result in an increasing crime rate. So what's the result? What's the result of that? Oh, we've got to spend more money on police as a response to crime, rather than spending money on social programs, which hundreds of studies have shown the correlation between poverty and crime. So in spite of any infrastructure bill, which goes, as I've demonstrated before, to corporations before anything else gets done, and they take their profits off the top. Yeah. What we're going to start seeing is more urban decay, more collapse of smaller communities. And this is absolutely, we've already got an increase in addiction, the opiate crisis, just being a small part of it. And then we've got synthetic drugs on top of that. The only thing that is keeping those from going higher is that so many states have now legalized marijuana, which offsets and decreases addiction to opiates and addictive substances. And on top of that, we've got an ever increasing, ever since 1999, the number of Americans on some form of antidepressant has increased and increased year after year after year. Every year, the addiction rate goes up, the number of Americans on antidepressants goes up, and then we've got more and more Americans that are using marijuana either medically or recreationally. Why? It's all because of depression, because of anxiety, stress, poverty. When you don't give any people anything else to hope for, they look for escape. So the more you see crime, you see addiction, the more you see all of poverty and addiction, these rise in tandem with one another. It's not a question. You can look at this from the micro to the macro, from individual communities, individual neighborhoods, all the way up to the national level. The more you increase addiction, the more you increase poverty and anxiety and stress, the more that you increase addiction. The more you increase addiction, the more you increase crime. The more you increase crime, the more that our government wants to spend on policing, to put more people in prison, which what? Then causes us to pay more taxes, which puts more of a burden on the taxpayer, the middle class, sending more middle class into poverty. It is more of a burden on them. In addition, the less that we spend on schools, on education, the more that you see an increase in the crime rate. All of these things all go together. So this is a crisis of capitalism. This is all caused by capitalism. We cannot deny this. You can try and come up with numbers that refute this, and you will fail. If you actually look at charts of the crime rate according to the general economy, the real economy, not the stock market, the more you see this absolute correlation between each of these things. So, if we do not change our course and start spending more money on society and taking more money away from the uber wealthy, then we are headed toward real crisis. We may think we're in a crisis now, but we're headed toward much worse if we do not start acting now. All right? So share this video. Talk about these subjects. If you can, please donate $1 a month to help expand the channel. And I will catch you in the next one.